The rain hammered against the windows of Mel's place as Katie Sullivan wiped down the counter for the third time that evening. The old diner was nearly empty, just her and the cook in the back who spent most of his time smoking cigarettes by the delivery door. The clock on the wall showed 10:30, and Katie was counting down the minutes until her shift ended at midnight. She had been working at Mel's for almost 2 years now, saving every penny she could to pay for nursing school. The tips were decent on weekends, but Tuesday nights like this one barely covered her gas money. Still, she needed the job, and Mel was good to her. He let her take extra shifts when she needed them and never complained when she had to study during slow periods. The bell above the front door chimed, and Katie looked up to see a young man step inside, shaking the rain from his jacket. He was maybe her age, with short brown hair and tired eyes that seemed to carry more weight than someone his age should bear. His clothes were simple, just jeans and a plain shirt, but something about the way he carried himself made Katie think he was used to being in charge of things. "Evening?" Katie said with her practiced waitress smile. "Sit anywhere you like." The man nodded and chose a booth near the window, sliding in with his back to the wall. Katie noticed he glanced around the diner before settling in, like he was checking all the exits. She had seen that behavior before in some of her regular customers who had served overseas. Katie walked over with a menu and a glass of water. "What can I get you started with tonight?" "Coffee, please," he said quietly. "And maybe a piece of pie if you have any. We've got apple and cherry. The apple's fresh from this morning." "Apple sounds good." Katie poured his coffee from the pot she always kept ready and cut him a generous slice of pie. When she set it down, she noticed his hands had a slight tremor as he reached for the cup. He wrapped both hands around it like he was trying to warm himself, even though the diner was plenty warm. "Long day?" Katie asked, lingering by his table. The diner was empty except for them, and something about this guy made her want to make sure he was okay. He looked up at her with those tired eyes and managed a weak smile. "You could say that. Long week, actually." Katie refilled his cup without him asking. "I'm Katie, by the way. I don't think I've seen you around before." "Jake," he said, just passing through, I think. "Well, Jake, you picked a good night for pie. Mel's wife makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. That's not just me talking either. We've got a trophy from the county fair to prove it." Jake took a bite and nodded. "It's really good, thank ye." "You." Katie could tell he wanted to be left alone, but something kept her there. Maybe it was the way his shoulders sagged, or how he stared out the rain-streaked window like he was looking at something far away. She had always been good at reading people, and this man looked like he was carrying the weight of the world. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" she asked. "It's been dead all night and my feet are killing me." Jake gestured to the seat across from him, and Katie slid into the booth. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot she had brought over. "So what brings you to our little town?" she asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in slow circles on the table. "Work," he finally said. "Big project coming up. Lots of people depending on me to get it right." "Sounds stressful." "It is." He took another sip of coffee. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm really cut out for it, you know? Like maybe they picked the wrong person." Katie studied his face. She could see the doubt there, mixed with something that looked like fear. "What kind of work do you do?" "I can't really talk about it," Jake said. "But let's just say that if I mess up, a lot of people could get hurt." "That's a heavy load to carry." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You have no idea." Katie leaned forward a little. "Can I tell you something my grandma used to say? She raised me after my parents died, and she had this way of making everything seem less scary." Jake nodded, and Katie could see he was really listening. "She used to tell me that we're not responsible for carrying the whole world on our shoulders. We just have to show up and do our best with whatever piece of it we're given. Some days that piece might be bigger than others, but we're never carrying it alone." Sounds like a smart lady. She was. She also used to say that the most important thing you can do is just show up. Not be perfect, not have all the answers, just show up and do what needs doing. Jake was quiet again, but Katie could see something changing in his expression. Some of the tension seemed to leave his shoulders. "I've I've been thinking about this project. For weeks, he said. Going over every detail, every possible thing that could go wrong. Maybe I've been overthinking it. Maybe you have, Katie agreed. Sometimes the best thing you can do is trust yourself and the people around you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain and the distant sound of the cook moving around in the kitchen. Jake finished his pie and had 2 more cups of coffee while they talked about small things. Katie told him about nursing school and her plans to work in pediatrics. Jake didn't say much about himself, but he was a good listener. When Jake finally looked at his watch, it was almost midnight. I should probably get going, he said. Early day tomorrow. He pulled out his wallet and left a $20 bill on the table, way more than he owed for coffee and pie. That's too much, Katie said. No, it's not, Jake replied, standing up. Thank you, Katie. For the pie and the coffee, but mostly for listening. You have no idea how much I needed to hear what you said tonight. Just remember what my grandma always said. Show up and do your best. That's all anyone can ask. Jake smiled, and for the first time that night, it reached his eyes. I'll remember. He walked to the door and turned back once more. Take care of yourself, Katie. You too, Jake. Good luck with your project. The bell chimed as the door closed behind him, and Katie watched through the window as he walked away into the rain. She had a feeling she would never see him again, but she was glad she could help him through whatever he was dealing with. Sometimes that was all you could do for someone. Just listen and remind them they were not as alone as they felt. Katie cleared his table and finished closing up the diner. As she drove home through the quiet streets, she thought about the young man with the tired eyes and hoped tomorrow would be easier for him. Katie woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. She rolled over and squinted at the screen. 7 in the morning, and her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was calling. Katie groaned and answered. Katie, are you watching the news? Mrs. Chen's voice was shaky with excitement and fear. No, I just woke up. What's wrong? Turn on your television right now, Channel 5. You need to see this. Katie stumbled out of bed and grabbed the remote. The moment the screen flickered on, she knew. Something big was happening. Instead of the usual morning show, a serious-looking news anchor was speaking in urgent tones. Red letters across the bottom of the screen read, Breaking News. To repeat our top story this morning, the anchor was saying, multiple government sources have confirmed that unknown aircraft have been detected approaching Earth from deep space. The objects appear to be artificial in nature and are not responding to any attempts at communication. Katie sank onto her couch, suddenly wide awake. The anchor continued speaking, but the words seemed to float around her without meaning. Alien ships coming to Earth. The military was being called up. The scene changed to show footage from various military bases around the country. Fighter jets were taking off in groups, their engines screaming as they climbed into the morning sky. Katie watched F-16s and F-22s streaming away from runways, heading toward something she could not imagine. Meanwhile, 40 miles away at Nellis Air Force Base, Captain Jake Morrison was already suited up and walking toward his aircraft. The same man who had sat in Katie's diner 12 hours earlier now wore a flight suit covered in patches and insignia. His helmet was tucked under his arm, and his face showed the focused calm of someone who had trained for this moment his entire career. Jake's crew chief met him at his F-22 Raptor, a sleek gray fighter that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The crew chief was a sergeant named Rodriguez who had been working on Jake's plane for 2 years. She's ready to go, Captain, Rodriguez said, patting the side of the aircraft. All systems green. Weapons loaded and checked twice. Thanks, Rodriguez, Jake replied, running his hand along the plane's wing. Keep her ready for when I get back. Yes, sir. You bring her home safe, you hear? Jake nodded and climbed up the ladder into his cockpit. As he strapped himself in and began running through his pre-flight checks, he thought about the conversation he had had with Katie just hours before. Her words about showing up and doing your best echoed in his mind as he went through the familiar routine of preparing for flight. The radio crackled to life in his headset. Viper Flight, this is Control. You are cleared for immediate takeoff. Proceed to Waypoint Alpha and await further instructions. Control Viper 1, copy. Viper Flight, form up on me. Jake pushed the throttles forward and felt the incredible power of his engines pushing him back into his seat. His F-22 rolled down the runway and lifted into the clear morning sky, followed by 3 other fighters from his squadron. Within minutes, they were climbing toward 30,000 feet, heading west toward the Pacific Ocean. Back in her apartment, Katie watched the news coverage with growing dread. The reporters were trying to stay calm, but she could hear the fear in their voices. Nobody knew what the approaching ships wanted or what they were capable of. The military was mobilizing everything they had, but everyone understood they were facing something completely unknown. The objects are still approximately 6 hours away from Earth, the anchor was saying. NASA scientists estimate they are traveling at speeds that should be impossible according to our current understanding of physics. The president is expected to address the nation within the hour. Katie's phone rang again. This time it was her manager at the diner. "Katie, we're closing today," Mel said. "I don't think anybody's going to be thinking about food with all this going on. Stay home and stay safe." Katie thanked him and hung up. She made coffee and sat glued to her television, watching as the most important day in human history unfolded before her eyes. High above the Pacific, Jake's squadron had reached their patrol area. The other pilots in his flight were all experienced, but Jake could hear the tension in their voices over the radio. They were flying towards something that might be beyond anything they had ever trained for. "Viper 1, this is Control," came the voice from their base. "We have radar contact with the unknown objects. They are larger than initially estimated. Much larger." Jake looked at his radar screen and saw them. 4 blips, moving in perfect formation toward Earth. Even from this distance, his instruments could tell that each object was bigger than any aircraft carrier. "How big?" Jake asked into his radio. "Viper 1, each object appears to be approximately 2 miles in length." Jake felt his stomach drop. 2 miles long. Nothing human had ever built anything that size that could fly. He thought about Katie's words again, about showing up and doing your best. Right now, his best was all that stood between these alien ships and the people of Earth. "Viper flight, maintain formation and prepare for visual contact," Jake ordered his squadron. "Stay sharp, people. We're about to make history." The 4 F-22s continued their flight toward the unknown, carrying with them the hopes and fears of everyone watching the news back on Earth. Katie sat in her apartment, not knowing that the troubled young man she had comforted the night before was now flying toward humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. On her television, military experts were being interviewed trying to explain what might happen next, but none of them really knew. No one had ever faced anything like this before. Jake checked his weapon systems one more time and adjusted his grip on the flight controls. Whatever was coming, he would be ready. Katie's simple wisdom had given him the peace of mind he needed to focus on the job ahead. He just had to show up and do his best. The alien ships grew larger on his radar screen with each passing minute. The first alien ship appeared on Jake's horizon like a dark mountain floating in the sky. It was bigger than anything he had ever seen. Bigger than the largest building he could imagine. The ship's surface was smooth and black with no visible engines or windows. It moved through the air without making any sound that his instruments could detect. "Holy Mother of God," whispered Lieutenant Parks, one of the other pilots in Jake's squadron. "Control, are you seeing this?" "Viper flight. We have you on scope. Maintain distance and observe. Do not engage unless fired upon." Jake kept his F-22 in a wide circle around the massive alien vessel. 3 more ships just like it were spread out across the sky, each one moving slowly toward the California coast. His radar showed smaller objects launching from the alien ships, dozens of them heading in different directions. "Viper 1, this is Control. We're tracking multiple smaller craft separating from the main vessels. They appear to be heading toward major population centers." Jake's heart pounded as he watched the smaller alien ships streak away from their motherships. Each one was still larger than his F-22, but they moved with incredible speed and precision. He had never seen anything change direction so quickly or accelerate so fast. "Control, request permission to intercept the smaller craft," Jake said into his radio. "Negative, Viper 1. Maintain observation position." But even as Jake received his orders, the situation changed. One of the alien scout ships suddenly turned toward his squadron, moving faster than anything Jake had ever seen. In seconds, it was right in front of them, close enough that Jake could see strange symbols carved into its dark surface. "Viper flight, break formation!" Jake shouted. "Evasive maneuvers!" The alien ship fired something that looked like a bolt of blue lightning. The energy beam passed between Jake's F-22 and Lieutenant Parks's aircraft, missing both by inches. Jake felt the heat from the weapon even through his cockpit. "We're taking fire," Parks yelled over the radio. "Control, we are under attack. Viper flight, you are cleared to engage. Repeat, you are cleared to engage." Jake rolled his fighter to the right and locked onto the alien ship with his missiles. "Fox 2, he called out, firing 2 heat-seeking missiles at the strange craft. The missiles struck the alien ship, but instead of exploding, they seemed to be absorbed by its surface. The alien vessel didn't even slow down. It turned toward Jake's F-22 and fired another blue energy beam. This time, the alien weapon found its target. The beam struck Lieutenant Parks's aircraft in the wing, and Jake watched in horror as his friend's F-22 began to break apart. Parks managed to eject, his parachute opening just before his fighter crashed into the ocean below. "Parks is down," Jake reported. "I repeat, Parks is down." The alien ship turned its attention to Jake next. He pushed his throttles to full power and dove toward the ocean, trying to use his speed and maneuverability to stay alive. Behind him, he could hear the other pilots in his squadron engaging more alien craft. Lieutenant Murphy's voice came over the radio, tight with fear. "I can't shake this thing. It's right on my tail." "Murphy, brake left," Jake shouted, pulling his own aircraft into a sharp turn. He could see Murphy's F-22 being chased by another alien scout ship. The alien vessel stayed right behind Murphy no matter how hard he turned or how fast he flew. Jake tried to help his wingman, firing his cannon at the alien ship chasing Murphy. The bullets seemed to bounce off the alien craft's surface without doing any damage. The alien ship ignored Jake completely and continued pursuing Murphy. "I'm hit!" Murphy screamed over the radio. "Engine failure, I'm going down!" Jake watched another of his friends eject from his burning aircraft. In less than 5 minutes, his squadron had been cut in half. The alien ships were faster, stronger, and seemed to be immune to human weapons. "Viper 1, this is Control. Return to base immediately. We're scrambling additional squadrons." Jake wanted to stay and fight, but he knew it was hopeless. His F-22 had taken damage from the alien energy weapons and several of his systems were failing. He turned east toward the California coast, pushing his damaged fighter as hard as he dared. Behind him, he could see the alien motherships continuing their approach toward Earth. The smaller scout ships were spreading out in all directions, and Jake knew that similar battles were probably happening all over the world. His engine began making strange noises, and warning lights flashed on his instrument panel. Jake realized he wasn't going to make it back to his base. He needed to find somewhere to land, and he needed to find it fast. Below him, he could see the small town where he had stopped for coffee the night before. There was a small airport just outside the town, nothing more than a single runway used by crop dusters and private planes. It would have to do. "Control, this is Viper 1. I'm declaring an emergency. Engine failure. I'm attempting to land at a civilian airfield. Viper 1, we copy. Emergency crews are en route." Jake lined up his approach to the small runway. His F-22 was not designed to land on such a short strip, but he had no choice. He touched down hard and used every bit of his skill to bring the powerful fighter to a stop before running out of runway. As he climbed out of his cockpit, Jake realized he was only a few miles from Mel's place. The irony wasn't lost on him. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been sitting in that diner, worried about a mission he couldn't discuss. Now that mission had turned into humanity's first battle with alien invaders, and he had barely survived. People were running toward his aircraft from the small terminal building. Jake could hear sirens in the distance as emergency vehicles raced toward the airport. Among the crowd of people, he spotted a familiar face. Katie Sullivan was running toward him, her face pale with shock and recognition. She had been watching the news at home when she heard about the fighter jet making an emergency landing at their local airport. Something had told her to come see for herself. "Jake?" she called out as she got closer. "Is that really you?" Jake pulled off his helmet and looked at the woman who had given him comfort and strength just hours before, in his flight suit and survival gear. He looked very different from the troubled young man who had sat in her diner. "Hello, Katie," he said quietly. "I guess I have some explaining to do." Katie stared at Jake in his flight suit, trying to connect the quiet man from her diner with the military pilot standing in front of her. His face was streaked with sweat and his hands were shaking, but not from nervousness this time. This was the aftermath of battle. "You're really a fighter pilot," she said, still not quite believing it. "F-22 Raptor pilot, yes," Jake replied. "Captain Jake Morrison, United States Air Force." Around them, people were gathering to look at the damaged aircraft. Katie could see scorch marks along the wings and holes in the fuselage where alien weapons had hit. The nose of the plane was cracked and fluid was leaking from somewhere underneath. "Are you hurt?" Katie asked, looking him over for injuries. "I'm okay. My plane took the worst of it." Jake glanced back at his F-22. "She got me home, but she won't be flying again anytime soon." Katie heard sirens getting closer. Fire trucks and ambulances were racing toward the airport, followed by military vehicles. "Jake, what's really happening out there? The news isn't telling us everything, is it?" Jake looked around at the crowd of civilians, then back at Katie. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Katie nodded and led him away from the growing crowd toward her car. They drove in silence to a small park on the edge of town, where Jake finally began to explain what he had seen. "The alien ships are huge, Katie, bigger than anything we've ever built, and they have weapons that make our best technology look like toys." Jake sat on a park bench and stared at his hands. "I lost 2 men today, good pilots, friends of mine." Katie sat beside him. "I'm sorry. We hit them with everything we had. Missiles, cannon fire, nothing worked. Their ships just absorbed the damage like it was nothing." Jake's voice was quiet but steady. "They're not here to make friends. What do they want?" "I don't know, but they're spreading out across the planet, sending scout ships to every major city. It looks like they're studying us, figuring out our defenses." Katie felt a chill run down her spine. "Are we going to be okay?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know that either, but I do know that we're not going to give up without a fight." Military vehicles began arriving at the park. Jake's radio crackled to life, and he could hear his commanding officer's voice calling for him. "I have to go," Jake said, standing up. "They'll want a full report on what happened out there." Katie reached into her purse and pulled out a small, silver charm on a thin chain. It was shaped like a star and looked very old. "This was my grandmother's," she said, pressing it into Jake's hand. "She always said it brought her luck. I want you to have it." Jake looked down at the charm, then back at Katie. "I can't take this, it's too important to you." "That's exactly why you should take it," Katie replied. "My grandmother wore it through 2 wars and never got a scratch. Maybe it will help keep you safe too." Jake closed his fingers around the charm and slipped the chain over his head. "Thank you. I'll bring it back to you when this is over. You?" "Better," Katie said with a smile that didn't quite hide her worry. The military vehicles were getting closer. Jake could see soldiers getting out and walking toward them. "Katie, I need you to promise me something," Jake said. "Whatever happens in the next few days, don't give up hope. We're going to find a way to beat these things." "How can you be so sure?" Jake thought about their conversation in the diner, about showing up and doing your best. "Because that's what humans do. We find a way." The soldiers reached them, and Jake was quickly surrounded by officers asking questions about the battle. Katie watched as they escorted him to a black SUV and drove away. She stood alone in the park, looking up at the sky where she could see distant contrails from military aircraft heading west. That night, Jake found himself in a briefing room at a secure military facility, surrounded by generals and intelligence officers. On a large screen at the front of the room were photos and video footage from the day's encounters with the alien ships. "Captain Morrison," said General Walsh, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, "your report indicates that our conventional weapons had no effect on the alien craft." "That's correct, sir. Direct hits with Sidewinder missiles were completely ineffective. The alien ships seemed to absorb the explosions." "What about their weapons?" Jake touched the charm Katie had given him, now hidden under his uniform shirt. Their energy weapons cut through our aircraft like they were made of paper. I've never seen anything like it. The general nodded grimly. We've received similar reports from pilots all over the world. The aliens seem to be testing our responses, learning our capabilities. Sir, what about our next move? We're working on that, Captain. But first, we need more intelligence about these ships. We need to know what makes them tick. General Walsh walked to the front of the room and pointed at the screen. Captain Morrison, I'm assigning you to a special reconnaissance mission. We need someone to get close to the alien mothership and gather detailed intelligence about their technology. Jake felt his stomach drop. How close, sir? Close enough to scan their hull composition, energy signatures, and defensive systems. It's extremely dangerous, but you're one of our best pilots and you've already faced them in combat. Jake thought about Katie's words again, about showing up and doing what needed to be done. When do we launch, sir? Tomorrow at dawn. We're outfitting a specially modified F-22 with advanced stealth technology and long-range sensors. Your job is to get in, gather the data, and get out without being detected. And if I am detected, General Walsh's expression was grim. Then, you do whatever it takes to get that intelligence back to us. The survival of our species may depend on what you find out there. Jake nodded. I understand, sir. As the briefing ended and Jake was shown to his quarters for the night, he held Katie's charm and thought about the conversation that had started it all. Tomorrow, he would fly toward the unknown once again, carrying with him not just the hopes of humanity, but the simple wisdom of a small-town waitress who believed in showing up and doing your best. 3 days had passed since Jake's reconnaissance mission to the alien mothership. Katie had not heard anything about him since the military took him away from the park. The news reported that a pilot had successfully gathered intelligence about the alien ships, but no names were given. Katie could only hope that Jake was still alive. She was back at work at Mel's place, trying to keep her mind busy. The diner was busier than usual because people wanted to be around others during these frightening times. Everyone was talking about the aliens and what might happen next. The morning news had been confusing. Reports said the alien ships had suddenly stopped their advance toward Earth. They were still there, hovering in the sky, but they were no longer sending out scout ships or moving toward major cities. Nobody knew what this meant. Katie was refilling coffee cups when she heard a sound that made her stop and listen. It was the deep roar of jet engines, but much louder than the commercial planes that sometimes flew over their town. The sound was getting closer. Other people in the diner heard it too. Conversation stopped as everyone looked toward the windows. The sound grew louder, until it seemed to shake the entire building. What in the world is that? Asked Mr. Peterson, one of Katie's regular customers. Katie walked to the front window and looked up at the sky. What she saw made her heart nearly stop. A sleek gray F-22 Raptor was flying low over Main Street, so low that she could see the pilot in the cockpit. The fighter jet was moving slowly, like it was looking for something. That plane is way too low, said another customer. Is it in trouble? Katie watched as the F-22 made a wide turn at the end of Main Street and came back, flying even lower this time. Then something impossible happened. The fighter jet began to descend toward the street itself, as if the pilot intended to land right there, on the asphalt. Everyone get back from the windows, Katie shouted, but she couldn't move herself. She was frozen, watching the most incredible thing she had ever seen. The F-22 touched down on Main Street with surprising gentleness. Its wheels hit the pavement, and the pilot used the brakes to bring the powerful aircraft to a stop right in front of Mel's place. The engines wound down to a whisper, and then everything was quiet except for car alarms going off up and down the street. People poured out of the diner and other shops to stare at the fighter jet sitting on their main street, like it belonged there. Katie pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding. She already knew who the pilot was before the cockpit opened. Jake Morrison climbed out of his F-22, still wearing his flight suit and helmet. He pulled off the helmet and looked around until he spotted Katie in the crowd. When their eyes met, he smiled the same tired smile she remembered from 3 nights ago. "Hi, Katie," he said, walking toward her. "I told you I'd bring this back." Jake reached under his flight suit and pulled out the silver chain with her grandmother's star charm. Katie's hands shook as she took it from him. "You came back," she said, barely able to speak. "I promised I would." The crowd around them was growing larger. People were taking pictures with their phones and asking questions, but Jake only had eyes for Katie. "Jake, what happened out there? Why did the alien ship stop?" Jake looked up at the clear blue sky, then back at Katie. "It's over. They're leaving." "Leaving? Why?" "Because of what you taught me," Jake said quietly. "About showing up and being human." Katie looked confused, so Jake continued. "My mission was to get close to their mothership and scan it for weaknesses. I managed to get inside their defensive perimeter without being detected. But then something went wrong with my stealth system, and they caught me. But you're here. You're okay. I should have been destroyed instantly. Their weapons could have vaporized my plane in seconds, but they didn't fire. Instead, they surrounded me with their scout ships and they talked to me." Katie's eyes widened. "They talked to you?" "Not with words. They put images in my head, showed me what they were thinking. They were curious about us, about humans. They had been watching our planet for a long time, trying to decide if we were worth saving or if we were just another violent species that needed to be stopped." Jake took her hands in his. "They showed me the battles from their perspective. They saw how our pilots fought even when they knew they couldn't win. They saw how people on the ground helped each other instead of panicking. But most importantly, they saw something in my mind when they scanned my thoughts." "What did they see?" "They saw you, Katie. They saw our conversation in the diner. They saw how a complete stranger showed kindness to someone who was afraid and alone. They realized that humans have something they had never encountered before in all their travels across the galaxy." "What's that?" "The ability to care about each other even when we're scared. The ability to show compassion to strangers. They've met hundreds of species, but none of them had what we have." Katie felt tears running down her cheeks. "So they decided not to invade us?" "More than that. They decided we're worth protecting. They're going to help us, teach us things that will make our world better. But they wanted me to come back here first, to thank the person who showed them what humanity really is." The crowd around them had grown quiet, listening to Jake's words. Katie looked around at all the faces, some familiar and some not, all of them showing the same mix of wonder and relief. "You mean my grandmother's advice about showing up and doing your best actually helped save the world?" Jake laughed, and this time it was full of real joy. "Your grandmother's advice and your kind heart. The aliens said they've never seen anything like what happened in that diner. One person reaching out to help another person, asking for nothing in return." Katie wiped her eyes and looked at the F-22 sitting on Main Street. "So what happens now? Now I have to fly this thing back to base and probably get in trouble for using a military aircraft for personal business," Jake said with a grin. "But first, I have a question for you." "What's that?" Jake gestured toward his fighter jet. "Want to go for a ride? I promise it's safer than it looks." Katie looked at the sleek aircraft, then back at Jake. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I figure I owe you at least one airplane ride for saving the human race." Katie laughed despite her tears. "Okay, but if we crash, I'm blaming you." As Jake helped Katie climb into the back seat of his F-22, the crowd cheered and applauded. Within minutes, they were airborne, soaring over the town that had become the unlikely center of humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. From high above, Katie could see her small town spread out below them, looking peaceful and ordinary. It was hard to believe that such an extraordinary thing had started with something as simple as a cup of coffee and a kind word to a stranger. "Thank you," Jake said over the intercom. "For what?" "For reminding me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is just show up." Katie smiled as they flew through the clear blue sky, knowing that her grandmother would have been proud.